I have to admit, I'm partial to Dave McCormick. Known him for several years now. I've gotten to know him real well. My family and I really adore him. We know he'd be a tremendous senator, a great attribute to the American people, the entire process. And one of his strengths, among many, economic, the border, is foreign policy. David McCormick looks like Israel has started its response attack against Iran, and the reports are coming in, and the IDF is saying it's going to be very targeted toward the military. Now, I guarantee you, if Donald Trump were president, it'd be targeted toward nuclear, oil, and the demise of this regime. But I still think Netanyahu is a tremendous leader. He's not going to do pinpricks, is he?
Yeah, no, thank God he didn't listen to Joe Biden and his saying we should have a ceasefire, that we shouldn't Israel shouldn't have taken out all the leadership of Hezbollah, killed the architects of the horrible tragedy and horrific brutality of Gaza in attacks into Israel, and that he's not influenced, let's hope he's not influenced Israel in taking it back to Iran. Iran is the original sin here. $100 billion of money we gave them in the deal that Obama did in 2015. The deciding vote was a guy named Bob Casey, Mark, and we're still living with the consequences of that. I got a lot of faith in Israel's military capacity and their leadership and the way they're systematically destroying this terrorist threat.
You know, my great fear, Dave McCormick, is people like Bob Casey. They lie to their constituents. They pretend, they speak out of both sides of their mouth. They pretend that they're these big supporters of Israel, but of course he's not. You've pointed out that he supports a real, in my view, neo-Nazi Islamist out there in Pittsburgh. Her name is Lee. Yeah. But the fact is, he'll fall right in line with the Kamala Harris. They will continue to boycott Israel, withhold weapons, threaten Israel, on and on and on. This is dire for our country and Israel, this election, isn't it?
100%. This is a friend of mine said this the other day. He said October 7th was like a flare went up on the battlefield. And you actually see who your friends are and who your foes are. And it's a two-front war. We have to stand by Israel in truly an existential moment. Its very existence is under siege from Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. All these terrorist proxies are attacking Israel, and we need to show absolute conviction in their fight, which is our fight, to destroy these terrorists. But we also have a fight at home with this anti-Semitism, which, listen, I certainly knew it lurked beneath the surface, but I was shocked by what we saw after October 7th and the weakness, a lack of moral clarity of our leadership. And none is weaker than Bob Casey, who stands up and says, I'm strong on Israel, and then endorses Summer Lee. And when she says the most anti-Semitic things post-October 7th, he doesn't withdraw his endorsement. You can't have it both ways. This is a test. It's one of those tests you can't study for. October 7th was a test, and we saw where people stand, and we got a lot of weak leaders without moral convictions who don't stand with Israel and who don't stand against anti-Semitism, and we need to get him the hell out of office.
And this guy's like a press release senator, isn't he? I mean, you see senators going to the floor. You see great senators like Tom Cotton and Ted Cruz and others. Full-throated support for Israel, fight to get them the arms that they need. You now have an administration that is literally right now impounding weapons unconstitutionally from Israel and so forth. You're the kind of guy that will go to the floor with your background, your military experience, your business experience. You're not going to be, afraid of anything. You'll say what you need to say. This guy, Bob Casey, look at him. He's like a nebbish.
Yeah, he's a 30-year career politician, 30 years in elected office, 18 years in the Senate. And the best I could say about him, Mark, is he's weak. When the bullets start flying, he ducks. And yet he votes 98% of the time with the liberal, radical agenda of Biden and Harris. And if, God forbid, if Harris were president, he would vote 99% of the time with her extreme liberal policies. But more than that, he's not a leader. So the contrast is clear. Do you want change? Do you want a guy who's a West Point graduate, a combat veteran, a seventh-generation Pennsylvania, someone who's been a successful business guy, and an outsider who's going to fight for change? Or do you want a career politician who is going to support the status quo or worse, a tip into this radical liberal agenda that we're already seeing how it's destroying our country? That's the choice. And I think the reason my race is closing and that, it's a toss-up now, and I think the momentum's clearly on my side, is people are seeing that choice much more clearly. Change versus the status quo, strength versus weakness, common sense policies versus a radical liberal agenda under Kamala Harris and Bob Casey.
You know, I saw what happened to Norm Coleman, Senator Coleman, when he won re-election and they stole it from him by constant challenging, getting in front of Democrat state judges who kept recounting until he won. And then we get Al Franken, of all people. I'm concerned about this. Number one, the numbers in Pennsylvania, you're monitoring them. How do they look in terms of early voting? I know the registration has been good. And number two, the ground game and the legal fare that goes, the lawfare and so forth. How do you look at that? What do you see?
Well, listen, I don't think we can be too paranoid about this. You know, I think we got to be so vigilant. But the registration numbers have been shockingly good in our direction. We're becoming a red state. If you have me on your show in 2026 as Pennsylvania's next senator, we're going to be red. That's how fast it's moving, Mark. So that's good. On mail-in ballot, we've closed the gap dramatically. New registrations for mail-in ballots and submitting mail-in ballots, Republicans are actually out-submitting Democrats in some days on mail-in ballots. So they're still going to have the advantage. It's going to be a lot less. Election integrity, I'm worried about. I mean, we've got a huge investment here. We're going to have 5,000 election observers, 500 lawyers. It's President Trump's top priority. It's mine. But we got 67 counties, and some of those counties, you know, have had a history of election fraud, and we got to be very vigilant to make sure that we get a fair election. And what I can say is there's focus and resources, but we got to play whack-a-mole. Anytime there's any indication of anything going amiss, we got to challenge it. We got to have the lawyers right there. We got to have the observers right there, and make sure President Trump and I and everybody else on the ticket gets a fair shot.
Talking to Dave McCormick, one of the problems is your Supreme Court. It's extremely partisan. I think it's a 5-2 majority. The Republicans didn't pay attention, and so you get this radical left-wing court. They did the same thing in 2020. So in some respects, I think you would need to find a federal cause of action or something like that to get it after the state system.
Well, Mark, you and I both know we need voter ID. I mean, the fact that in our country, you need an ID to get on an airplane, an ID to cash a check, and you don't need an ID to exercise the most fundamental responsibility of a citizen, which is to vote, is just evidence of how bankrupt the Democratic Party is. And Bob Casey, they've opposed voter ID because it stands in the way of voter fraud. And if you really wanted high-integrity elections, you'd embrace voter ID, and the Democrats won't. And that is one of the big problems, and one of the things I'll fight for. I know President Trump has said this. I will be on day one supporting national legislation on the voter ID.
We're here with Dave McCormick running for the Senate in Pennsylvania. I strongly encourage you to vote for him. I've endorsed him strongly. It's early voting. And, of course, President Trump and the whole down ticket. We need to do well in Pennsylvania. We can. If you patriots out there, if you do your thing, do it now and get other people to do it. You know, Dave McCormick, Kamala Harris and Biden are dangerously unserious people. He's heading off to Delaware. He hasn't turned around. She's on stage with Beyonce. She's the vice president. They can say whatever they want about J.D. Vance. That's the president and the vice president. Are they acting presidential and vice presidential? Should they have a statement? I don't mean a statement issued by one of their flacks. I mean, even go on TV and make a statement. We support Israel. Israel will fight this war as it sees fit. We know they'll do what they need to do, and we will support them in their victory.
Yeah, it's not serious. It's not serious people dealing with the serious problems of the world. And you know, President Biden seems like he's sort of out to lunch, and Kamala Harris is not engaged on the issues in a way that you would hope and expect and pray of the vice president. And you know, listen, two things are problematic here. One is we know what she believes. We've seen her in her own words in the last few years talk about banning fracking, transitioning energy workers. We talked about defunding the police. We've seen her say she wants to legalize illegal immigrants, give them citizenship. She wants to make sure they have federal benefits. She wants to confiscate the guns. These are her own words. But now when we see her in the spotlight, when she's running for the most important office in the world, she can't take a serious interview. She can't answer a serious question about what to do with the future of America. And certainly our adversaries are noticing this, and this is what I'm most worried about. We have adversaries around the world that are testing us. Iran's testing us. Russia's testing us. China's testing us, rattling its saber. And it's because they think America's weak. They saw the debacle in Afghanistan. They saw the invasion of Ukraine, which would have never happened under President Trump. They saw the surveillance balloon floating over American territory, over military bases for 10 days. It's not a serious bunch of people that are securing America. We need peace through strength. We can only have it through strength. We learned that on the playground when we were kids, and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, they exude weakness. And I'm truly worried about a world, even for the next, until President Trump takes office, that this will be a moment where our adversaries really try to test us. This is a serious time. These are not serious people.
Apparently, Israel gave a heads up to our administration right before it attacked because they can't trust them. They will leak it. And that's why it took them this long in the first place, because they leaked it before. And you would think with that kind of a heads up, at least one of these knuckleheads would decide to take control of this. Now, here's my prediction. I could be dead wrong. I'm not good at predictions. Let me suggest this to you, Dave McCormick, that at some point, but of course way out of the necessary time frame, Kamala Harris will make some kind of statement and look very, stern, or Joe Biden will mumble something, but they'll do it too little, too late, and not substantive enough. That's my guess.
Yeah. Well, they have not had the clarity. They have not given their unequivocal support to Israel in the existential fight of its life. They have tried to show there's equivalence between what's happening with Israel's attacks against the terrorists that killed 1,200 people on October 7th, and Israel's attacks on those terrorist fighters in Gaza, in Hezbollah, in Lebanon, and so forth. So there's not moral clarity, and there's not strength. And so when you don't have moral clarity and strength, you get these kind of wishy-washy statements. These leaks that come out about President Biden wanting a ceasefire and so forth. This is absolutely the opposite of what we would have if President Trump was in office. And if I was in the Senate, I would be an incredibly strong voice on these things, because that's the way it works with the use of power. You have to use power thoughtfully. You have to use it carefully. You have to use it respectfully. But you have to know how to wield power. Biden and Harris don't know how to wield power, and we've lost power under their leadership.
Now let's get to the border and the economy in the few minutes we have left. Your opponent has done nothing and did nothing. That's the bottom line to help secure this border. Nothing. He voted for this phony bipartisan bill, which would have allowed 20 million illegal aliens in. And nobody talks about chain migration. Have you noticed that, Dave?
Right.
Nobody.
Yeah.
So these people get amnesty, or they have children, and you can bring in, on average, it's 19 people. You can bring in more. I mean, that is an overwhelming number. We've got these Venezuelan gangs, MS-13, fentanyl pouring into the country. God knows what's going on. And Bob Casey sits on his ass. And then when it comes to the economy, they really think that using the Department of Justice, that's the way you're going to bring down prices, going after farmers and going after small grocery stores and everything else. What's your response to that?
Mark, I couldn't agree more. On the border, I've looked at all the dimensions. The national security risk that we now have because of the leadership of Biden, Harris, and Casey is beyond anything people understand. I'll just give you one statistic. 4,000 Pennsylvanians last year died of the fentanyl poison, 116,000 nationally. You and I both remember Vietnam. We lost 58,000 killed in action in Vietnam. We had 2 Vietnams last year because of these cartels sending this poison across our borders, pushers putting it into our communities. Medina and I sat down my wife and I, in the last 2 months with a number of fentanyl families.
By the way, who's also an accomplished professional, particularly when it comes to foreign policy and national security. I just want people to know.
Oh man, she's the better half, and to say accomplished, she served as President Trump's deputy national security advisor and had the opportunity to be part of the team that worked on the Abraham Accords. So she is a force of nature. But this fentanyl thing, Mark, this has to be taken seriously on the supply side. We got to secure the border, but we got to go after these cartels. We need to determine them to be terrorist organizations. We need to use drones and special operations and destroy them. We need to deal with the demand side and the addiction problems, the mental health problems we have in America. We need to deal with the harm mitigation by having Narcan and all these things available to our communities. This is a problem of epic proportion, and Bob Casey has done nothing, and it's gotten much worse in Pennsylvania. Inflation's the same. Listen, the line of accountability here is clear. $5 trillion of reckless spending plus a war on fossil fuels drove up prices to a 40-year high. And guess who is hurting? Working families. 60% of Pennsylvanians live paycheck to paycheck. So people who live paycheck to paycheck have gotten squeezed. Higher prices for food, rent, fuel, electricity. Their wages haven't kept up. Seniors on fixed income. It's a disaster for them. Bidenomics is not working. It's failing. The people it's helping are rich people that live in Washington, D.C. and New York and San Francisco. It's hurting working families across Pennsylvania.
Folks, you can help Dave McCormick, who will be such a tremendous senator. Dave McCormick, PA.com. Dave McCormick, McCormick, PA.com. It's going to come down, I think, to very, very few votes in the state of Pennsylvania. That's the way it works. It's my home state, too. You really got to turn out in red areas and in moderate to conservative Democrat areas. You know, America, all the Democrats in Pennsylvania aren't from Philadelphia. There's a lot of people who are blue-collar, who are union, people of great faith. They're Catholic, they're Jewish, and so forth and so on. That's why so many of them are not happy with the radicals and the leftists in the Democrat Party. They're not represented by those people, and yet Bob Casey has thrown in with them, and your big job has been, Dave McCormick, to explain to all the folks in Pennsylvania, he's not his father's son. He is a radical leftist that might as well represent Massachusetts or California. Final words, my friend.
Hey, listen, thank you, Mark, for having me. Thanks for all you're doing. This is a race, the most important, I believe, of our lifetimes, this election. And in my particular case, this is change versus the status quo, strength versus weakness, and an outsider combat vet versus a career politician. We need change. Honored to do it. Be honored to serve the great people of Pennsylvania if they put me in there, and I sure hope they do, and I'd love to serve them as their next senator. So thanks for the opportunity.
You'd be fantastic. Dave McCormick, thank you, my friend. You take care of yourself.
Have a great night.
You too. Pennsylvania, they say the Keystone State is the key to everything.